If you raise laying hens for eggs like we do, then you probably already know that the two things that they really need for good eggs are a good source of protein and a good source of calcium. The protein for the egg and the calcium for the shell. Today we're going to talk about how we feed our chickens their own eggshells back as a source of calcium, and maybe address some misconceptions about that and show the process one way that you can do it. But first, I'm going to cook myself up some breakfast with these eggs I just collected so I can get the shells back out to them. I think I'm going to make a breakfast quesadilla. Man, those breakfast quesadillas are good. That's something my wife turned me on to. Now let's get to processing these eggshells. So the first thing we do after we enjoy the eggs is we take the eggshells and we wash that membrane out of them. Got to get that membrane out so that they dry good, they crunch up good, it makes it easier. Plus, I just think it's probably better not to leave that stuff in there, especially if you're going to store it for a few days while the shells build up and you have enough to do this with. We usually have a bowl of eggshells from the last few days, and I'll just add the new ones here to it until they dry out and they get ready to be nice and crunchy and ready to bake. So once the membrane is out and the shells are dry, you really have some choices here. You can just crush up the eggshells and go ahead and take them out to the chickens, or you can bake them. Some people like to bake them because they say it kills the bacteria or it makes the egg more brittle and easier to crush up. I'm going to be honest. We usually don't bake them, but I'm going to go ahead and bake them today just for the fun of it and show you how we do it if we're going to bake it. You can just take the eggshells that you want to bake that you're going to feed to your chickens and just put them on a pan. We're going to use a toaster oven today because we don't have a huge load of them, and just lay them out like this. Then we just go ahead and put them in the toaster oven and we bake them for about 5 minutes on 350 degrees, and they're going to come out nice and crispy. All right, time to pull them out and let them cool for a minute. So like I said, we don't normally bake them. We usually just crush them up. And I'll tell you one thing, baking eggshells is not the most pleasant aroma for your kitchen either. So that's another thing to think about. You got guests coming over, maybe not be the right time to bake your eggshells. So now it's really just a matter of taking the shells and crushing them up. We put them into a mason jar. We try not to crush them up in too small of pieces because they really just kind of pass through the chickens a little faster that way. And the bigger chunks, they can break to the size they want, and they digest them a little bit better, get more calcium out of them. But baking really does make them a lot easier to crunch up, that's for sure. And we'll do this and then we'll get them out to the chickens. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put them in this cup that we have here, just a little bit. Some of them fall on the ground. As you can see they're excited to have some eggshells this morning. There's a couple different methods and ways to feed them. Hey. And this is the one people will recommend the most, is just have a little area for them. I'll probably put some in a feeder over there too, separate from their food. I'll get into some other methods and controversies behind it in a second. The main reason you'll hear why not to mix the shells in with their actual feed is because they can potentially eat too many shells, get too much calcium, which could actually be detrimental to the chickens. Now, I'm going to say we have mixed it in with their food before, and I don't find that to be the case. The argument is if you set it aside, then when they feel they need calcium, they'll go to the eggshells. When they feel they need food, they'll go to the food. But if they're mixed together, they might get too much calcium. When we've put it in their food, we'll just put a few eggshells into the food, and usually what happens is they run out of food, right? They eat all the food, and there's still a lot of eggshells in there. So I'm kind of the mind that if they're smart enough to know they need calcium and go to where you have the shells and food and go to where they have the food, then they're smart enough to pick through their food too. And I found that, however, it's just advisable to keep them separate. One other reason that you may not want to mix it with their food, and this is a reason that we're specifically going to keep it separate, is if you have pullets that are not of egg laying age yet, if they're not laying eggs, then they can particularly get too much calcium. They don't need that much calcium if they're not laying eggs. And if you mix it with the food, then they could be getting it with the hens, if they have the same feeder, that are laying. So if you keep them separate, the layers will go to the shells and the non-layers will stay away from them. So we don't want to mix it with the food now, because we are actually getting some new chicks coming up. And when we finally introduce them here into the coop, we don't really want them getting into the eggshells until they're of laying age. So that's a big reason to keep the shells and the food separate. The last thing that people say who maybe don't want to feed their chickens chicken eggshells is that they feel it encourages them to eat their own eggs, lay the eggs and eat them. You're conditioning them to want those shells and want, that egg. And we just haven't found that the case. Our chickens do not eat their own eggs. They never have. And people, the blogs I read or other videos I see, most people don't have that problem. I'm not saying that it couldn't be, but that's where you need to know your own chickens. Give it a try. But yeah, it's never been a problem for us. So this is just a great way to get them calcium. For some people, feeding chickens back their own eggshells might seem taboo. I don't know, might seem like some sort of cannibalistic act or something. And that's okay. There's other options too, like oyster shells. But we bought oyster shells for them for calcium, and they never touched them. And I hear that from a lot of chicken owners, that they really weren't into oyster shells. I mean, the oyster shells are like pebbles, whereas their own eggshells are, they're a little bit softer, a little bit easier for them to eat. So the oyster shells didn't work for us. The eggshells do, and it's a common practice. So if you can get over the kind of the taboo thinking of our minds, they're fine with it. It's healthy for them, and that's why we do it. So that's how we feed our chickens their own eggshells, for extra calcium, for strong eggshells and good eggs. And like I said earlier, baking the shells isn't normally a part of our routine, but it does make them easier to crunch up and give them a better texture. And I think the chickens, I don't know, they might like it a little better too. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you next time.